I used to skip over these kind of picks, boring names, buried in ADP, no buzz, but there's a reason that I make the playoffs every year. So let's talk about 5 guys that don't look like fantasy stars, but will produce like them in 2025. I've been trying to fade Alvin Kamara, but every time I do, I come back to the same truth. He's the one who survives when the offense breaks. Kamara led all running backs in expected fantasy points per game last year. He was the RB7 in usage per game on an offense that everyone can agree was pretty broken. And that usage didn't come from touchdowns or broken runs. It came from volume. Reliable, bankable, PPR volume. 330 receptions since 2020. That's the most among all running backs. Last year alone, he averaged 106 yards per game, total yards. That was 6th best in the league. 330 receptions since 2020. Crazy. And now he's going at the 509 behind guys like Chuba Hubbard, RJ Harvey. What are we doing here? The argument's always the same. He's 30. The offense stinks. They'll probably phase him out. I feel like we've been hearing that for multiple years now. But here's what's real. Kellen Moore just called Kamara a premier player and said he'll be a big part of the offense again. He's really just how they're going to build the way this offense wants to move down the field. So even when defenses knew it was coming last year, they still couldn't shut it down. No Condre Miller emergence. I'm not really that worried about Deion Neal. He was a 6th rounder. So they kind of look around at the running back room post-draft, and it's still Kamara. Great offensive line. We've got a top 10 pick locked in at left tackle now. You've got one of the most athletic and violent offensive lines in the league if you really look into it. So that's the setup. And sure, the quarterback is a really big question mark here. Tyler Shucks might be a guy, but regardless, Kamara is still going to be the escape valve here. So those 4-yard swing passes, we're going to see those all year. That's how he continues to just crush in PPR time and time again. People keep fading him just because of his age. But look at last year. He had more rush yards than he's had since 2020. He caught 75 passes in 13 games. He averaged over 17 fantasy points per game, and that's with the Saints ranked bottom 10 in scoring. The role's not shrinking. If anything, it's consolidating. The only reason his ADP is this low is because casual drafters just assume that age equals decline. But if you're looking at the numbers, they actually show a lot of durability. They show usage. They show a team that still runs through Kamara, not around him. So here's what you do. You take him in the 5th before ADP creeps and kind of starts to settle where it should in August. You plug him as your RB2, and you laugh when he finishes top 10 in catches among the position. Again, he just gets it done. And you're still not fading that. And if you are, you're really missing the point. Kamara doesn't need to break the game. He just needs to play. Because when he plays, he gives you a chance to win. Speaking of winning, you ever draft a guy, feel nothing, and then realize halfway through the season that he's quietly been carrying you? Because that's the next player I want to talk about, because I don't think we're giving him nearly enough credit. But what if I told you the guy averaging 6 catches and 73 yards last year is still on the board in round 7? Not because he's mid, but because he's boring. Jakobi Meyers just posted the best season of his career, and nobody cares. Now he gets Geno Smith, now he gets Chip Kelly, and here's what's real. Jakobi just posted career highs in targets, catches, and yards, but he did this as the de facto wide receiver 1 after the Raiders moved on from Devontae Adams. Jakobi commanded a 28.2% target share from week 4 on. You know how rare that is? You can get him in the 7th round as your wide receiver 4. So what are we doing here? People keep saying he's just a floor guy, but the floor keeps rising. Wide receiver 24, wide receiver 26, wide receiver 20, wide receiver 19. That's his last 4 seasons. His yards per route run wasn't elite, but he made up for it with volume and trust. Now he gets a quarterback upgrade with Geno Smith and a real system with Chip Kelly. Brock Bowers is there, of course. Obviously that helps. He pulls away safeties. It forces attention elsewhere. It's a good thing. Meyers is going to continue to be operating in softer coverage and kind of continue to kind of get his quarterback in rhythm and be that safety valve, but also just continue to rack up a ton of volume, which is what we want. I don't think we've seen the best from this guy, but here's kind of where it flips. Everyone wants like the shiny new piece. Maybe it's the Jack Besh sleeper in this offense, but competing with a veteran who just averaged 73 yards per game without Devontae Adams running coverage, I don't know. Until proven otherwise, Meyers is the one here with the job. Efficiency isn't special, but the role is. He's one of the few guys in this range that will get 7 targets every single week. And if Geno really does elevate this offense, this is something I've been thinking about. Meyers could sneak back into the wide receiver 2 tier without anyone really noticing. So here's the play. You don't chase upside in round 7, you lock in production. You draft Jakobi as your wide receiver 4, and by mid-season, you're starting him every week without hesitation. And while everyone else is just rolling the dice, you're stacking up points with usable weeks because he doesn't even need to go nuclear. He just needs to not leave you hanging. Sometimes it's the boring picks that win leagues. That's it. Jakobi gets open, gets fed, gets it done, and that's really all you need. Well, maybe not all you need. If you want my fantasy draft kit for free, rankings, sleepers, busts, cheat sheets, go to fantasyaccelerator.com or just hit the first link in the description. You can get full access for free until week 1, but I'm not promising that deal is gonna stay up all summer. Now, not every boring pick feels safe, but then you see this guy that's still producing like a top 15 back and no one wants to talk about him. Everyone's just pretending that he doesn't exist. So that's what we got next. You're going to scroll right past Joe Mixon, and it's going to cost you 250 touches and 12 touchdowns. But what if I told you Mixon averaged 20.1 touches per game last year? 17.5 of those were rush attempts, his highest mark since 2021. And he scored 12 touchdowns in 14 games. Despite no line that gave him the lowest yards per contact of his entire career, let's be clear, this wasn't just coasting on reputation this season. This was a volume-based running back 1 caliber workload with no serious competition in this backfield. Yet he's going in the 5th round, behind rookies, behind some part-time players. I just can't figure this one out. So let's unpack it a little bit. Mixon averaged 2.92 yards per contact after rust, his highest since 2021. He ripped off 10-plus yard runs at an 11.4% rate. That was his best since 2018. He handled nearly 80% of the Texans' backfield touches when active, so even with a mediocre line, Mixon created yards. He ran angry, he ran efficiently, and in the red zone, that's where they trusted him. He was top 5 in red zone touches per game. Now, let's talk about what's changed. This line is still shaky, that's the knock, but this offense also moves the ball. They've built it around movement, RPO, spacing. They just added Woody Marks as a 3rd down guy, not as a threat, but more of a compliment. Marks is a long down and distance type of guy. Mixon still owns the early downs, still owns the red zone. All of those things. That's exactly where fantasy points live. So yeah, maybe he's not flashy, but he's productive and at a cost where he might be the safest pick in the entire dead zone. So people bring up Nick Chubb like it's a problem, but Chubb is coming off that horrific knee injury, something that sidelines a lot of people for multiple years, or they never really come back the same from. The contract is backup level. It's really only just incentive based on 1 year. So if anything, Chubb's presence just keeps Mixon fresh, and until something changes, it's still Mixon's job. So here's what I'm doing. I'm drafting him every time in the 5th. No panic about the ankle. He's moving well in that brace and expected to be back during camp. I'm riding this volume early, and in an offense that should take off, he's a set it and forget it RB2. And if he starts to fade, you just flip him because that's the leverage. That's the strategy. That's how you turn boring picks into wins. Mixon doesn't need your excitement. He just needs the rock. And when he gets it, he's as likely as anyone to hit pay dirt. But you know what else consistently gets you paid? Guys that get wide receiver 1 volume, but still get huge upgrades at quarterback in the offseason. Fantasy players are the worst. We beg for air yards, volume, that alpha role. Calvin Ridley gave us all of that last year, and we still called him a bust. Now we have ourselves a massive buying opportunity because honestly, I think you guys were watching all the wrong things last year. Let's talk about what actually happened. Ridley posted a career low 3.8 receptions per game, but a career high 15.9 yards per catch. He averaged 15.7 air yards per target, which is the highest of his entire career. That's not a drop in talent. That's really just a change in role. It wasn't the usage, it was the quarterback play. If we're being completely honest, Will Levis under center. 18.6 of Ridley's targets were inaccurate. That's nearly double the rate we saw from Mason Rudolph. So if the throws land 2 feet closer, we're telling a completely different story with Ridley. 26% of his targets were 20-plus yards downfield. Do you know who else lives in that range? DK Metcalf, George Pickens, Jordan Addison. Those are all top 30 guys. Ridley's going in the 5th as wide receiver 35. And the target share, it's still elite, 23.7% across the season. That's wide receiver 15 level usage, even in an inconsistent system overall. Now he gets Cam Ward, a deep ball first quarterback with much better mechanics than Levis had. Ward isn't some sort of savior, but he honestly doesn't need to be. He just needs to deliver a few of those deep balls on time, because that's all Ridley was missing. Timing, trust, accuracy. You give him that, and suddenly you have a guy that nearly cleared 1,100 yards in a completely broken offense that gets some deeper targets downfield that are actually catchable. And suddenly those 3 for 72 stat lines become 6 for 110 and a score. Here's where the perception breaks. People say Ridley was a disappointment, but the numbers show otherwise. He still posted a top 20 air yard share, still had wide receiver 1 level target volume. He still operated as the primary deep threat every single week. If you're punishing him for inaccurate passes, you're blaming the wrong variable. Because now the setup is better, Ward brings a better deep ball, and the Titans' commitment to Ridley has already happened, financially at least, and the target tree is shallow enough to where there's really nothing in his way. So what do you do with that? You take the gift. You draft him in the 5th, where his price already bakes in the risk, and you hold, because the minute this hits, he's a 1,000-yard wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 weeks on the board. Don't make last year's frustration block this year's opportunity. The usage is there, the role is there, the usage is completely locked, if we're being honest with ourselves, and the quarterback play might finally be enough. Ridley doesn't need the system to save him, he just needs the ball, because he still wins downfield. But if you want my top 150 rankings for free, links in the description. That's what I'm using in every single draft this year. But if your league gets it first, you're probably cooked. All right, Ridley's your downfield bet. Now let's talk about a guy underneath, someone no one's drafting who might outscore all of them. What if I told you the most underrated slot wide receiver in fantasy gets more separation than almost anyone in the league, and he's going 40 picks too late? Josh Allen ranks top 3 in target rate per route run among all NFL wide receivers last season. It's 29.7%. That's not a fluke. That's a player who consistently earns targets. He caught 76 passes for 103 yards and 5 scores on just 394 routes. That type of efficiency is better than Debo, better than DJ Moore, the list goes on. And he's going at the end of the 7th round in fantasy drafts after guys who barely get on the field. He's not just a slot guy, he's a problem. And the Colts notice. They put him in motion on 38% of his routes, one of the highest rates in the entire league. This wasn't a late season bump. He was earning over 6 targets per game, even when the quarterback play was a complete joke. Now he's back healthy, practicing in minicamp, and fully locked into a clean role. And it's not like the depth chart changed. Alec Pierce still runs cardio, Pittman still draws attention. Downs lives underneath where the ball actually goes. But most people fade him because of Anthony Richardson. They think mobile quarterbacks don't support slot guys, which honestly is a pretty lazy take, because Downs doesn't rely on tight window timed throws. He gets schemed into space, and Richardson doesn't need to hit him on a rope. He just needs to dump it off. And let's be real, Daniel Jones is going to get a shot this year. He was good enough to get Malik Neighbors the ball last year. Regardless, the slot role isn't quarterback dependent. It's completely coverage proof. So when the Colts need a first down, Downs is their guy. So here's the play. You take him in round 8, you stash him as your wide receiver 4, and by week 3, he's an every week flex. He may not win you your league, but he's going to win you plenty of close weekly matchups through consistency, and that's all that matters. He's healthy, he's trusted, and he separates like no one else in this range, and no one's talking about him. To me, that's not a sleeper. That's an edge, so click his name and don't look back.